My name is Laura Capel-Abra. For those of you that I don't know, I know there's some of you we have come paths across many times before, but also we've got a lot of new people on the call as well. So I set up Stress Matters a few years ago after having a career in marketing and events. And I went through what I now know as burnout back in my mid-20s. And it was something that at the time I didn't know what it was, and for a good number of years afterwards I didn't know what it was either. I went back into the events and marketing industry, and I found myself running an agency, and the next thing I know is that I've got team members going off on sick leave with stress. And I thought about how awful I felt about the fact that I
really just got downstairs then. Is that hers? Yeah.
Sorry, can everybody put themselves
right next to us, isn't it? They got upstairs.
So I was in a situation where I thought I was creating an environment where actually well-being was really part of what I was focusing on. But unfortunately, these people were going off on sick leave. So I stepped out of the business and looked at how I could help people in similar kind of businesses to try and improve that well-being. So I retrained, and I did some research into my previous industry, in the marketing events industry, to try and understand a little bit more about stress. So I set up Stress Matters to try and look at how we can create workplace wellbeing in a sustainable way, because lots of people will spend money on wellbeing initiatives, which is great to some degree, but actually, as with anything in a business, we need to be strategic about the way we implement things, and we also need to make sure it's sustainable long term. Particularly at the moment, sustainability is obviously really, really important to make sure that all our businesses, small and large, survive over the next few months. So we don't want to be spending money for the sake of it, and actually we want to make sure that any money we do spend, there is a good return on investment on. And we know that by increasing employee well-being, there's an increase on productivity and therefore also an increase in profitability. So over the next kind of 30, 40 minutes or so, we are going to talk you through that concept around sustainability, understanding a little bit more about ROI, and then we're going to take you through some, what we hope, quite practical things you guys can be doing in terms of improving well-being in your organisation. So I'm going to pass over to James, who is going to talk you through the challenges that I'm sure we're all probably aware that we're facing at the moment.
Indeed. Thank you very much, Laura. So before we get on to that, I'd just like to give you a little bit of a background on myself. I've been involved in business support in many different forms over about the past 15 years. For the past nearly 10 years, I've been managing director of a surface manufacturing business that I set up nearly 10 years ago. So I understand the pressures of running a business, and in particular of balancing the needs of customers, employees and shareholders. Like Laura, I've also had lived experience of ill mental health with depression and anxiety, and that has inspired me to now join forces with Laura, work with Stress Matters, and I've become a qualified mental health first aid instructor as well. So what's the challenge for businesses when it comes to mental health? Why should we be concerned about this rather than just leaving it to individuals and families to manage? Well, put simply, it's costing UK businesses a small fortune. 42 to 45 billion pounds per year. Now that averages out at about £1,700 per employee per year on average. So if you've got a business of 100 people, you're looking at about £170,000 per year lost due to mental ill health. Now, in finance, insurance and real estate industries, if any of you guys are involved in those industries, that figure is actually a lot higher. You're looking at about £3,300 per employee per year. Now, it's interesting to note that that figure is also roughly the same, that the £1,700 per year, roughly the same between public and private sector. There's not a huge amount of difference. And worryingly, the trend is upwards. Since 2018, we've seen a 16% increase in these costs. And bear in mind, these are pre-COVID costs as well. So we anticipate the trend for this to actually be much higher over the coming years, unfortunately. Now, as a percentage of the total number of instances, it's interesting to also note that it is projected that mental health problems will soon surpass other work-related illnesses. Now, whilst this is a concern for all organisations, it's actually deteriorating more in larger organisations, so 250 employees plus. Now, that 42 to 45 billion is made up of three key areas. Absenteeism, where people are not turning up to work because of ill mental health. Presenteeism, where people are turning up to work but are not as productive as they should or could be. And turnover costs, such as the cost of replacing somebody who has left work due to mental ill health and retraining new staff, that sort of thing. So I'd like to ask you guys a question now. Okay, there's going to be a poll hopefully that pops up in a moment, and I'd like to get your thoughts on how much of that 42 to 45 billion pounds do you think is due to work-related absence? So how much do you think is due to work-related absence? So we've got 6.8, 13.5, 24.9 or 30.2. So whilst your answers come in thick and fast, I'll give you just a second to complete that. Hopefully, I'll be able to tell you.
Okay, we are nearly there. There's a few of you more just need to vote. Okay, so we are looking at 38% of you are saying 30.2 billion. We've got next in at 13.5 billion is 33%. We've got 24.9 billion, 24% if you think, and 5% of you think 6.8 billion.
Interesting. Okay, so excuse me, it might surprise you to know then that actually it only represents 6.8 billion of the cost. And the largest cost of this is actually due to presenteeism. So as you can see from this slide, we're looking at 26.6 to 29.3% in presenteeism. Absence has actually been on the decline over the years, but unfortunately, the cost of presenteeism has been on the rise, and that's a worrying trend. And as you can see, the turnover cost there as well is 8.6. So you can see that presenteeism costs UK businesses roughly 3.5 times more than absenteeism. Now, this is due to, so how does presenteeism manifest itself? How does it actually show itself? Well, it's things like lack of productivity, people coming to work and sitting on their desks, but, you know, or at their computers at home, however it may look now, but not actually being particularly productive because of they might be struggling with mental ill health. Now, that can also manifest itself in many other ways. People making mistakes, people not doing good work, which then results in, in business being lost or pitches not being won, that sort of thing. It can also be stuff like, you know, if your mind is away and you've missed your train, and all of a sudden you've got to spend £200 on a new train ticket, or you've completely forgotten to send something off to a client that needs to be there tomorrow, and all of a sudden you've got to spend a small fortune on a courier. Even things like that. These are all costs that we don't really think about when it comes to mental ill health and presenteeism, but they are real costs. Now, one of the reasons why presenteeism is on the rise is due to an increased perception of job insecurity. So people thinking that they have to go to work, otherwise they might lose their job. It could also be down to changing working patterns as well, allowing people to work from home and claim that they're working, even though actually they might be struggling with some kind of mental illness. Now, these costs don't actually represent the full costs of mental ill health to a society. It doesn't include the wider effect on the team's morale within a workplace, and it doesn't include the effect on families, communities, and the wider society. Now, as I've said, there's no line in your budget for these costs. They manifest themselves in so many different ways. And we're never going to get them to disappear entirely, but there are things that we can do that we'll talk about throughout the rest of this presentation to substantially reduce it. And at the moment, that is quite key
I'm on a webinar.
Profitability.
That's all right.
So hands up now, everybody who is experiencing organizational change right now, some kind of change in your organization. Raise your hands, let's see.
Quite a few of you. So lots of faces we can't see, so you can do raise hand. You can work that out on your Zoom.
Yeah. Lots of you, most of you in fact, which isn't surprising given everything that's going on right now, of course. Now, organisational change being handled poorly is one of the top issues that causes mental ill health. It's one of the major contributing factors in an organisation to this. So much like the Build Back Better campaign for environmental issues, we now as businesses have a chance to change the way that we handle this change in order to minimise impact or the negative impact on mental health. So what's the opportunity then? Excuse me. Excuse me. So what's the opportunity for businesses? Well, let's first of all have a look at one of the impacts, positive impacts that this crisis has had on our staff with regards to working from home. Now, if you look at the three pillars of sustainability, economic, environmental, and social, there have been some quite key benefits that have been enjoyed by businesses and individuals for those employees that have been able to work from home where possible. Obviously, we appreciate that not everybody can work from home. But of course, on the economic side, businesses are now looking at reducing their office costs, and individuals are saving a lot of money on travel. Environmentally, we're of course spending a lot less CO2. We're using a lot less CO2 to travel to and from offices, and indeed to travel across the world to see suppliers and clients and so forth. Environmentally, sorry, we've done that one. Socially, although working from home is for some people causing some level of isolation, a lot of people have been able to spend a lot more time with their family. So there have been benefits there. And many businesses now, as you probably all know, are planning when they do go back into the post-COVID world properly, that they will be that their employees will be splitting their time between home and work in order to get a good balance there. Now, many businesses were reluctant to let staff work from home in a pre-COVID world due to potential trust issues. But having it thrust upon them, we've now seen that businesses and individuals have benefited from this change and are benefiting from this change, and trust has increased in employees. So just looking at that as an example and trying to take that forward to wellbeing in general, what are the benefits of investing in wellbeing programs for businesses? Well, these stats are pretty staggering. On average, you're looking at a return on investment of 5 to 1. So if you put a £10,000 investment into your business in wellbeing programs and mental health programs, you are going to see on average a £50,000 return for that investment. And the bulk of that reduction is will be in presenteeism. Now, the best strategies actually are seeing a return of between 9 and 11 to 1. So for that same £10,000 investment, you could be getting back around £100,000. Now those are just figures that we cannot ignore. They are absolutely staggering. So in terms of the lower return initiatives, these tend to be much more around firefighting. So battling with issues that are currently in the organisation right now. So this can be things like counselling, CBT, potentially group sessions like yoga or relaxation and things like that. Now, whilst we're not saying you should get rid of those at all, it's interesting to note that they are the lower return initiatives. The much higher return strategies tend to relate to much wider ranging culture change and raising awareness in your business around mental health and wellbeing. And that can be done through programs such as mental health first aid training, and involving your whole business in developing and implementing the well-being strategies. So increasingly, we are seeing that businesses are having to compromise on value and on their USPs, and having to compete a lot more on cost, which of course we don't want to have to do as businesses, but it's now a feature of the post-COVID world. Unfortunately, that's the world we're living in right now. Now, in that kind of scenario, we need to make the most that we can from the revenue that we can generate, and being as efficient as possible is the best way to do that. And getting the most from your people gives businesses the opportunity to maximize profit, even in a scenario where you've got reduced revenue. Now, the other thing that we all know is that workforces are far better at delivering creativity, exhibiting agility, and generating innovation. Now, in a post-pandemic world, these three skills are needed more than ever in order to survive and to thrive. Now, one of the issues when it comes to trying to deliver these kind of skills in our businesses is that we all know that diverse communities, having a diverse workforce, it contributes significantly to us being able to deliver creativity, agility, and innovation. But unfortunately, the stats show that BAME and young workers are more vulnerable to mental ill health than other groups. Excuse me. So we need to be concentrating on well-being for a number of reasons, but you can see that there is a potential knock-on effect to our ability to have a diverse workforce, and also to be creative, innovative, and agile through not looking out for the well-being and mental health of our workers. So just looking for a moment at sustainability once again. Excuse me, what makes up a sustainable business? Well, with regards to economics, we know that most businesses have been focusing very heavily on this at the moment, and quite rightly so. But and environmentally, we were doing, there were pretty good trends pre-COVID of businesses spending more effort and money on becoming more environmentally aware, and hopefully that will carry on post-COVID as well, especially with campaigns such as Build Back Better. But we are seeing that, and this tends to happen in in recessions, that the social pillar tends to be the one that suffers the most, and is probably one of the pillars that is missing mostly from most of your businesses right now. And it's understandable, because it's the area where we can't see the direct cost of the business, and it's very easy to put off, it's very easy to strip budgets from it. But as we've seen so far, the returns on investments that businesses can enjoy from making sure you do focus on that area are pretty substantial. So what can you guys actually do about this? What can you take back to your businesses and potentially, in order to actually potentially take action? Well, reviewing what you're currently doing with regards to your policies and processes around sustainability in that social area, environmental and economic. Do your policies still make sense in this new COVID and post-COVID world? What value do they actually add? Did they add value before, but potentially not now? What gaps do you have? I'm saying that in general, the stats show that a lot of businesses will have big gaps in their social pillar right now, but is that true for your business? And if it is true, what are the opportunities for filling those gaps that you might have for your business? So I'm just going to hand you over now to Laura. She's going to talk to you now more about the importance of insights, accountability, and support for your business.
Okay, guys. So as I said, when I set up Stress Matters, it was very much based on trying to understand the industry that I worked in and what the pressures were. So I knew the industry, I knew the pressure personally, but actually on that more universal basis. So insights has always been a really key part of what we do, because for me, being able to understand the situation, being able to identify what the actual problem is, means you can find a solution for it, because otherwise what we're trying to do is find solutions for a problem we don't really understand. So it's really important to gather insights. And what I mean by that is taking the data that might be available to us and analysing that and interpreting it to be able to extract the insights. Just having the data doesn't really help. It's what we can do with that data that's important. And the next stage is doing something. So I have a real pet hate of people saying they are going to do something and not doing it. And I know that's common across quite a lot of people, and particularly in workforces where senior management might say they're going to do something, but it never manifests itself. So accountability is another really important part in making change happen. And that final part is support. So thinking about actually what you can do to support your team and the support that you need as well. So we work across these three key pillars, and they're pillars that we encourage all of our clients to work into their own wellbeing programs as well, whether or not it's with us or not. So having those insights, building an accountability and measurability into everything you're doing, and offering support to those that need it. Now, we work across three different levels. So we work across that business level, so understand the insights around the business, because that's really important, as James mentioned there, in terms of the sustainability side, and keeping that kind of a level of accountability in terms of making sure that change happens. But we also know that you might have a culture within a business, but subcultures within teams, depending on the type of work that that team is doing, whether or not they're out and about, whether or not they're office-based, what the demographic of that group is. So looking at the team dynamics, understanding the line management structure of that team as well, and the strength of those line managers, and looking at the kind of support that can be involved in that. So potentially things like mental health first aider training across the kind of the business and teams. And I'll touch on that a little bit more later. And then right the way down to individual, because it's really important that whatever you do wellbeing wise, it works for the business, works for your team, but also works for individuals. So everybody is an individual. And in particular at the moment, we've all had a really individual experience of lockdown. So hopefully the fact that we are individuals has come across even more over the last few months. So one of the things that we do is encourage people to not only look at the insights on that business and team level, but look at them on an actual individual level as well. So what is the current wellbeing levels and interest for those individuals in your business? Keeping those individuals accountable as well, because as much as we have a duty of care as business leaders to support them, there's obviously a requirement for individuals to think about their self-care as well. And then there's that support need as well. So looking at how you can put together programs which are useful and relevant and applicable to each individual, not just having one size fits all for everybody. And that's when we're looking at that team level, is what can we do for a team, but it's really important to add that final level of individual in there as well. So when we think about insights, as I said, it's really important to gather data to understand it is what you're actually talking about. So I'd like to know in chat right now, how many employees you have in your UK operation. So if you're global, I'd like you to just pop in the chat box how many employees in UK. Now, if you know one of your colleagues is on the call as well, just think about whoever's name is first in the alphabet and let that person answer, and you can sit back so we don't have duplication. So we're going to do a little bit of maths for you with that number. So pop in the chat box how many UK employees you've got. So while we're looking at that, I want you to think about what kind of data you have in your business. So do you kind of carry out employee surveys? Do you do pulse check? Do you have data around absences and what those absences are due to? Now, it's really difficult being able to collate some of that data, because quite often people aren't willing to share and disclose what the reason for absence is. But also what we find is that sometimes people don't know that the reason for their absence is actually potentially mental ill health. So what we find when we're working with companies is that quite often individuals see the physical manifestation of stress, for example, but they don't realise that it's actually rooted back down to stress itself. So they just see the physical situation, such as a headache or stomachache, and they don't realise that the cause is actually the pressure and the stress that they're experiencing. So we want to be looking at the data you've got. And as I said, what's really important is then being able to convert that data into actual insights and understanding what it is that you are looking at on that business, team and individual level. So we know that more than half of people and businesses wouldn't speak to their manager about their mental health. And I also know that over 3/4 of managers, I think it's around 84%, would actually feel uncomfortable having a conversation about mental health with their colleagues. So we're in a situation where actually people don't necessarily want to share with their managers if there's a situation going on, and also people don't feel comfortable having those conversations. So it's really important that we empower individuals to feel comfortable to have that type of conversation. Now, James, do we have a little bit of information now about people on the call?
We do indeed. So just from the businesses that are excuse me, on this webinar today, we estimate based on the stats that you're looking at nearly £2 million per year is what the impact of mental ill health in just the businesses that are in this on this webinar today is.
Okay, so we're talking big numbers. As we said, we know that's an average, of course. Hopefully, some of you, the cost will be much lower. But unfortunately, as we mentioned, there'll be some industries and some businesses in particular where that cost is actually higher. So again, we wanted to make sure you can walk away from this webinar today with some really clear kind of things for you guys to do. So in terms of actions around insights, think about how you track your absences. So actually, do you have, I know some people just don't even track sick leave. So do you track it? And also, how do you track it? Is it something where it has to go through a central system? Is it something where your line managers just keeps it in the back of their head and only gets concerned if it's over a certain amount of days? So think about how you're tracking absences and how you can pick up on things such as mental health related absences in that. Also, try and take some time, and I appreciate time is a real challenge for everybody at the moment, but as we've said, hopefully the investment of time is really going to be worthwhile for you. Think about the pressure that each team and individual is experiencing. As I said, every individual is different, so everybody's going to have that unique experience of what's going on. So when we're thinking about returning to work, now some people that is going to be a physical return into an office or to on-site people's houses, people's offices, whatever it is that you do. And for some people, that's going to be really exciting because actually they get to go and see people, they get to enjoy the social side of their role again. And for other people, this is going to be a huge burden. And it's going to create a huge level of anxiety. So where they've just been finding balance over the last few months, they've then got to change everything again. And depending on the situation, they might have members of their family that are vulnerable, that they're caring for. Not all children are back at school, for example. So we need to be really, really conscious that when we say, great, the offices are going to open, for example, the impact that that's going to have on each individual. So really trying to understand those insights about each team member and what their situation is, and try to ensure that you allow for that kind of personal situation, particularly at the moment because of everything that's going on. And try and come up with that number. As we said, you know, we've been quoting this £1,700 per employee per year, but try and work out that number internally. So if you know the number, brilliant, you're one of the very few companies that do. And if you don't, just take that broad number to start off with and start talking about that number internally, because that's the number that is not on your budget. You know, that is not a line on its own anywhere in your accounts, but it is a number that's made up of lots of different lines. So try and think about how you can identify it. And again, that's the kind of thing we can help with, is trying to identify that data for you. So when we think about the second pillar, I mentioned we've got accountability. So that really important factor of making sure that when we say we're going to do something, we do it. So trying to think about, okay, if I'm going to ask my team a question, I'm going to try and find out some data and therefore then insight, I've got to be prepared to do something with that data, because I'm sure we've probably all been in companies where somebody said they're going to do something in some kind of employee survey and then nothing has come back out of it. And it's okay to not know what you're going to do quite yet, but involving the team in the process is really important. So all of the team at Stress Matters are also coaches, and that comes through in everything we do, particularly in terms of accountability. So we know how important it is to do goal setting. And one of the reasons is we know that if you think about you're going to do an idea, you've only got really about 10% chance of actually succeeding on it. If you decide when you're going to do something, you're looking at about 40% chance of success. If you actually make a proper plan of how you're going to do it, it's 50%. And the biggest impact you can have, and the biggest success criteria, is at 95%, and that's when you have an accountability partner. So if any of you that have ever been to the gym or had a personal trainer or had that really strict friend that's going to keep you on track with a fitness regime, for example, actually having that person you're accountable to and having to deliver, or maybe it's shareholders in terms of a business portfolio, actually it does make a difference because you have got to push towards that certain date and you have that deadline in place. So it's really important to think about building accountability and building those timescales in and being really clear with yourself and with other people what you're doing. But there's also a kind of external business way. So we've talked a little bit about kind of reducing costs in terms of increasing profitability, but we also know that there's an actual impact in terms of how you're perceived and how the external world see you to impact your profitability as well. So for example, we know that consumers are 55% more likely to go for working with companies that are social impact led. So think about actually potentially, can you share some of your practices? Now, it doesn't necessarily need to be externally because it might not be appropriate, but think about who is relevant to see this information. Also, potentially thinking about who you might be working with, the concept of conflict can come in quite a lot as well. So 76% of people would decline to work with companies that have conflicting beliefs to them as well. So again, be really careful that depending on who your market is, people are becoming much more vocal about what they're looking for in the partners that they work with. So actually going back to what we were talking about sustainability, thinking about how clear and concise your policies are and how robust they are, depending on who in particular you're trying to work with. So we know it's good for business, and as I said, it's not only good for that kind of external side, it's good for internal in terms of reducing costs as well. So in terms of a Stress Matters approach, we are very much kind of there as accountability partners. So we keep people on track because we know that for a lot of companies, well-being might be just one person. You might be here because it's your job, but you might just be here because it's actually personal interest to you. And we find that happens quite a lot, that those individuals in businesses that take this on are people that have had some kind of lived experience and they understand the impact that it can have. But we also know that being able to then get buy-in from senior management, that's where the key starts. So when we have our workplace wellbeing model that we've generated, one of that first kind of key steps is senior management buy-in, because it's really about cultural change. So when we then think about support, we are looking at our third pillar. So thinking about how you can support other people and obviously in terms of how they can support each other. So thinking about the fact that obviously at the moment we're in this kind of quite reactive time. You might not have a wellbeing strategy. That's okay. It doesn't mean you can't put one in place. Now, obviously, we're going to have to do some firefighting right now, but there's no reason it can't be built in with a proactive approach to wellbeing in the future as well. So it's really important to build any strategy, whatever part of the business is, but also in particular wellbeing, into your culture and values. So if you have an overarching vision, you have clear values in your business, make sure it adheres to those. So it's really important that that's there. And making sure that people feel like that they can talk about mental health and wellbeing. Now, it doesn't mean we're trying to encourage every single company to have constant conversation about it, but we know, as we were saying from the data earlier, that presenteeism has 3.5 times a greater cost than absenteeism. So make it clear to people that if they are unwell, they need to get treatment for that. Now, whether or not that's something that you can support with, or that they do on their own, getting them into a recovery process is really important to reduce the knock-on effect in terms of costs with businesses. So I mentioned mental health first aiders before. Mental health first aiders are a really good tool to be able to spot the signs and symptoms of mental ill health in your business, and they can work across the network in terms of your business. So they can also be kind of wellbeing champions as well for you, and keeping that eye on people. But what the role of a mental health first aid champion, a mental health first aider is also to signpost individuals to the support that they might need. So again, trying to pick up on it sooner than maybe the individual themselves even know. So as James mentioned, we're Mental Health First Aid England accredited. So that's something else we can help with as well. Now, if you have them or if you haven't had them, the other thing you need to think about is how they're supported. So being really clear on the fact that you can't just have people in the business that are going to take on potential emotional burden from other people. You need to be thinking about how they're supported internally. Now, depending on the size of your organisation, there might be a number of MHFAs, which means that actually they can support each other. As part of Stress Matters, we have a growing group of people that are part of our alumni that we're encouraging, they're supporting each other as well. So we try and support on that side too. So again, things that you guys can be thinking about. Think about your line managers and how skilled they are, but also how much they're trying to protect you as potentially senior manager or HR professionals from what's in front of them. So do they know when to escalate something or not? Or are they keeping it, potentially not even seeing it themselves in terms of ill health? If you've got teams, as I mentioned earlier, that some of them are doing really well, low absenteeism, really high productivity, really low turnover of staff, actually, can we get best practice from those internal teams and those line managers? So look at your business, look at those hot spots and those weaker spots in terms of what learnings can you take internally. As we said, think about the ROI of your current initiatives. It's really important you build a strategy, but we know the way this starts is a lot of people will start by doing tactical things, by doing kind of one-off initiatives, and that's great, but try and make a strategy around it. And it's really important to build your strategy around the 4 areas. And this comes part of our workplace wellbeing model as well, but physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual, because these are the 4 areas that make up the workplace wellbeing. Now, you'll have some individuals that are really strong on their own physical wellbeing outside of work, for example. So they're not going to benefit from physical classes or PT sessions you might put on for your team, but they might really benefit from a sense of connectivity with others in terms of social events. Again, other people might not feel comfortable doing any physical activity outside of work, so actually being able to support them on the physical well-being in the workplace might be really positive. So when you're thinking about your well-being strategies, remember that business, team, and individual level, because actually we can do things for the team, but also sometimes it's really useful to look at what we can do for individuals. So at Stress Matters, what we can do on that individual level is take those insights for that person and build the wellbeing strategy for that individual. So think of it a little bit like a kind of incentive platform where people get an allowance, and what we do is make sure that they have the right tools for their wellbeing and keep them accountable in terms of that ROI as well.
That's great. Thank you ever so much, Laura. So we're going to come to you guys for questions in a moment. We've got a few questions that have come through on the chat, which is brilliant. If you do have any more questions, please do either put them in the chat, or we'll ask you. You can ask us face to face in a moment. So if you haven't thought of one already, do think of one. And whilst you're doing that, I'm just going to very quickly sum up what we've talked about today. So mental ill health is costing your business money. Even if you've got fantastic strategies in place, as we were talking about earlier, you're never going to eliminate it completely. But the key thing is understanding, gaining those insights as to how much it is costing you, what impact it is having on your business, how is it potentially stopping you from being innovative, creative, and agile. And that's when we then talked about the opportunities for businesses to increase profit, and they're quite wide-ranging. In terms of presenteeism, we talked about, identify that this is the lion's share of the issues when it comes to excuse me, when it comes to well-being. So that's very important to understand. And then Laura has talked us through the importance of gaining insights, accountability, and support when you are looking at your wellbeing strategies and how to implement them, and that those focusing on those 3 things allows us to implement strategies that are going to gain the highest returns on investment, much more like the kind of 8 to 11 to 1 returns, rather than the kind of tick box ad hoc initiatives that you might do that would be a lot lower down the scale. And of course, Laura we both have talked about throughout the webinar that we're here to help. We can help. There's lots of different things that we can do to aid and assist in your well-being strategy journey. So thanks very much, guys. We're going to go to questions now. So Laura, how do you do it? Should we do the ones in the...
Yeah, so one of the questions we had was, well-being means something different to each person. How do you produce a program which is right for a total organisation? So as I was saying, yeah, you're completely right. It is definitely a very unique concept, well-being. Not only does the definition of well-being come across differently for each individual, which we find whenever we're doing a Write Your Wellbeing Plan workshop, but also the level of well-being is different for each individual as well. And that's why we say it's really important to look at those 3 levels. So look at what you're doing holistically in terms of policy and culture on that business level. Think about team activities that you can do, those group activities, but also recognize that there is a need for individuals. So try and gather those insights on an individual basis. And it might be that you give an allowance per person, for example, rather than investing in group sessions. So what we find, as I said, is for some of our clients, we'll work on that kind of team format where we'll do something that works for a little bit for everybody, and some will dip in and dip out through different sessions. But also on an individual level, we can do things like PT sessions just for that individual, or nutritional sessions, or counselling sessions, or spiritual connection to other people sessions. So there's lots of different things you can do at different levels, and it's important to have something that is robust across different levels. And that doesn't necessarily mean more money, it just means about being clever with how you spend that money as well. What other questions have we got?
So the next one that came in, where do the stats on ROI come from? So many of the statistics that have been used in this webinar have come from the most recent and up-to-date Deloitte research. It was literally published in January 2020. There are bits that have come from other areas as well. If you are particularly interested in finding out the source material, or delving deeper into some of the statistics and bits that we've talked about today, then I can send you, just email me. My email address is up on the screen right now. I'll be very happy to send you the bits of research that we've used to pull this all together.
Cool. Also had a question here about what can you do if you've already got certain things in place. So if you've got an employee assistance program in place, a lot of large organisations do, and smaller organisations starting to do things like mental health first aid, delivering workshops, sending people physical things. It sounds like you're in a really great place already. What I would say is analyse where you're at the moment and where you're trying to be. So things like an employee assistance program, what we find, and don't get us wrong, we are very big believers in counselling, for example. Both of us have used counsellors a lot. We understand the importance of counsellors. But what we also know is that sometimes uptake on employee assistance programs isn't as high as you would like it to be. So actually analyse the data of how much these programs are being used. Now, just because people aren't accessing employee assistance programs doesn't mean that they don't need support. And that is one of the common myths that we tend to find. People aren't accessing it, they must all be fine. And unfortunately, it doesn't work quite like that. So think about how you're communicating your wellbeing strategy internally, but try and make it a strategy. Try and make sure there is a common thread between each of these areas. Now, as I said, we work across the 4 areas of wellbeing that we see, which are physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. But even then, sometimes we will work with people about what their strategy is, and we'll find one word, potentially one of their values, that everything hangs off, and everything is built into that strategic approach. So it really does need to be part of the strategy rather than trying to add things in. So try and look at it as you would with any sales strategy, for example. Who is it you're trying to speak to, and what is the information that you have on them, i.e. your individual workforce, and what are you going to be your success factors of how impactful it is. And that's why we've hopefully tried to show you today how important ROI is. And we're not telling you it's easy. It's definitely a challenging area to get to numbers with, but hopefully the numbers we've shared with you today at least give you some ballparks to be working towards. But it's trying to really think about it as a strategy rather than individual initiatives or tactics.
There's a question here that I think is probably a good one for you to answer, Laura, because it's specifically about agencies. Most agencies are on their knees right now. Investing in mental health would be lovely, but most people are in survival mode. How can you implement something which is at a base cost that you can then potentially build up in the future once you've got more money to invest?
Yeah, so at that point, I would say think about that business point of culture. Now, you can go 2 ways. You can do a little bit of firefighting with individuals if you know certain individuals are really struggling. And this is where it's important to know each individual's kind of situation at the moment. So you can take that approach, which is help each individual as needed. Which can work, absolutely. What I would try and encourage you to do if you are really planning on embedding a strategy in the future is actually start at the top of that pyramid. So think about getting support in terms of looking at your strategy, but getting the team involved in that. So for example, one of the things we do is write your wellbeing plan workshop. So what we'll do is we'll get team members together and we'll run that workshop as a team. And, you know, we haven't got a huge amount of money to spend on team building right now. So actually it also doubles up as a team building exercise. But what it does is it gets people bought into the fact that you are going to make changes and remembering accountability. Because I said how important it is to actually say to do what you say you're going to do. So getting people bought into the concept of change, getting their input in that concept of change, even if the changes are going to come in 2, 3, 4 months' time, they will feel part of the process. And we know that cultural change has the biggest impact in terms of making a long-lasting, sustainable approach to well-being within a business.
That's great, thank you, Laura. One question that's come in: any ideas on the physical pillar for teams if some individuals are not comfortable doing fitness classes? Now, I think there's obviously there are individual things that you can do, but this one's specifically about teams. Well, what about, I mean, things like walking meetings? You know, instead of obviously, I know that not many of us are actually in offices doing meetings right now, but when we do go back to that scenario, potentially having walking meetings, or even if you are potentially scheduling a Zoom, maybe instead, does it need to be face to face? Can you have that meeting whilst both of you are walking with, you know, with hands free, and sort of getting a bit more of a physical element of well-being into a team environment? You could do something like that. When we are back into the office, you could try and do some team challenges, potentially around steps. So you could get teams to compete around getting the most number of steps, and potentially having little prizes and things like that. So there are many different ways that you can look at each of these pillars across the individual teams and business level. It's just being creative about that, and we've obviously got lots of ideas that we can share with you, but it's very key, as Laura said, that this is built on the insights rather than just jumping and doing things that you think are going to work.
The other thing I'd add to that is quite often we'll think about physical in terms of exercise and exercise classes, but actually it's also really important to think about physical in terms of things like sleep and nutrition as well. So it might be that fitness classes isn't the way forward for your team. It might be around looking at sleep and the nutrition that people take on board, or even water, for example. So there's lots of different elements to each of these 4 pillars, and absolutely we need to use those insights to understand which of these areas we can support each person on. So yeah, there tends to be more than just the option of a fitness class, but I appreciate that it can be a little bit difficult to see beyond that. And that's the kind of thing, as James said, we can help you guys on as well. I think that's it for questions, isn't it? So if anybody has got any final questions, we are good. Okay. So thank you so much, everybody, for partaking. Please do drop us a note if you want to have a conversation. We're more than happy to have a conversation with you about the kind of current status of wellbeing in your business. Please do connect in with us on social media as well, at Stress Matters HQ. We're on Instagram, Twitter and LinkedIn, and we'd love to have you part of our community as well. And we are here to try and support you as well. As I said, insights, accountability and support. Support is definitely one of our 3 core pillars. So we want to make sure we're here for you. And there are lots of things you can be doing for free, but also there's lots of things we can do to help you as well. So give us a shout if you need any support.